sleep now, and let the thunder of gods at war fade to the distant rumble of a fading storm. Let the screams of the dying become the whisper of wind through empty halls, and the clash of divine blades the gentle chime of bells in some forgotten chapel. This is the story of echoes of eternity, the story of the last battle before the last battle, the story of angels and daemons, of a gate that could not fall and a wall that had to hold, the story of the moments before the end of everything. There is a passage in the writings of Lorgar, the first heretic, that speaks of Sanguinius. Sanguinius is loyal to our father out of perfect love and perfect nobility, Lorgar wrote, and if that were all, he would still be the best of us. But he is also loyal out of perfect fear. He fears the reason he has wings. He fears what they might represent. He fears something went wrong during his creation, and he fears the effects this may have upon his own gene sons. The insecurity that binds Sanguinius to the Emperor, Lorgar continued, perhaps more so than any other of the Primarchs, is born of the belief that he has the most to prove. It is a bitter irony, because he is the one with the least, and it was Sanguinius who would stand at the Eternity Gate when all others had fallen, Sanguinius who would face the daemon his brother had become, Sanguinius who would hold the line between humanity and annihilation. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us begin where all stories of endings must begin, with an awakening. Zephon woke in the quiet dark, and as awakenings went, it was an unpleasant one. Transhumans of the Legiones Astartes usually came up clean and swift, a synaptic jerk into full consciousness. This was different. This was less an awakening from slumber, more a reclamation of awareness dredged from the depths of a coma. He lay on his back in a chamber that stank of death and decay, watching low-powered lights flickering above him, listening to the beat of his two hearts. One was slow and regular, the other beat only once every 10 seconds or so, its chambers held in reserve for moments of supreme exertion. Beneath those drums, his armor was an active thrum, purring on low power. "They have ranged the main line," he said to the ceiling. "You cannot stay here." He hadn't meant to say that. He didn't know why he'd said it, or what it meant. The words came unbidden, remnants of some memory his damaged brain was struggling to process. Like someone had their fingers inside his throat, pushing the muscles to make the wrong sounds. The last thing he remembered clearly was Gorgon Bar, the fire bright enough to blind him, the heat so hot it possessed its own searing sound, the unreal thunder of falling rocks. He had tried to shield a civilian, a woman named Ceres Gon, one of the Praetorians' interrogators. He had embraced her as the building came down upon them, warding her body with his own, and then, nothing. A voice he didn't recognize spoke from somewhere nearby. Interesting. Remnant memories. Perhaps the very last words pre-Acedia. The voice belonged to Arcan land, transmitted through a servo skull that hovered near the ceiling. The techno-archaeologist's holohost materialized a moment later, a thin, gaunt figure wrapped in tattered robes, looking exhausted beyond the limits of human endurance. His face was grimy, his hands trembling. "You look well, my friend," Zephon said softly. "Oh, do shut up," Lan sneered. "As to your location, you're in one of the Medicae sepulchres of Rizavi Bastion, down in the catacombs. It's where they stored you with who knows how many other dead, wounded, and stasis-bound. They told me you were either dead or terminally brain damaged, which, in the case of your transhuman breed, amounts to much the same thing. Reports conflicted on the matter. I decided to see for myself. You were supposed to be in storage at Bab. It's taken me forever to find you." Zephon lifted himself on limbs that purred with the smooth function of exquisite bionics. As the sickness in his stomach faded, he looked at his hands, seeing palms and fingers of polished metal, feeling them hum with the silken joy of augmetic perfection. Both of his arms were bionic now, as was one of his legs, not the crude and functional replacements of Legion warfare, but beautiful artisanal bionics shaped and nerve-sensed like human limbs. They didn't feel false. They felt like his hands, his arms, his leg. They felt natural, Lan's work, he knew. The Martian had engineered them himself to replace the Blood Angel's failing bionics. Something like hunger rushed through him as he rose, awakening with the restoration of consciousness and motion. It turned his tongue to leather. He felt it in his parched veins, as if every process inside his body cried out for lubricant. It was a thirst beyond dehydration. "I am bloodless," he thought. I am desiccated. A husk. How can they not see it? But his thralls couldn't see it. There was nothing visible to see. The Shafir, Ariste, and Shenkai, his faithful servants, closed in on him, examining his bionics, sealing the cracks in his warplate with smears of armor cement. The ultimate wall has fallen, Land continued, his tone matter-of-fact despite the horror of his words. It's riddled with holes. The War Master's horde is advancing across the districts of the Inner Palace. Almost everything has fallen except the Palatine Ring, Sidene Bastion, Meru, Sheol, all gone. The last we heard of Pythia and Avalon bastions, they were close to breaking. Bahab and the others still hold, but each one is besieged by the horde, their forces surrounded. The fourth Primarch is encircled at Pab Bastion, trapped there. Zephon felt a surge of irritation at Land's refusal to use names. Say his name, said the Blood Angel. Say Rogel Dawn. As I said, Land continued without missing a beat. The fourth Primarch, and the bastions that aren't already in ruins are being overrun or abandoned as we speak. Everything in the Inner Palace is decaying, or infected, or rotting, or mutating, or cancerous. We fall back as swiftly as we can, staying ahead of the foulness. Zephon processed this information slowly, his recovering mind struggling to accept the magnitude of the disaster. When he had fallen at Gorgon Bar, the defenses had still held. Now, it seemed, everything had crumbled. You don't know what it's like out there, Zephon, Land added, and for once his voice held no mockery. In the depths beneath the Golden Throne, Vulcan stood guard over a door that should never have needed guarding. The webway portal rose before him, that vast arch of Terran steel and alien stone, leading into the dimension between dimensions. Once it had represented humanity's greatest hope, a pathway to the stars that bypassed the horrors of the warp. Now it was a wound in reality, a breach, through which the enemies of mankind sought to pour. The Emperor held it closed. That was the simple truth that Vulcan had come to understand during his long vigil. The Master of Mankind sat upon the Golden Throne, expending his matchless psychic power to keep the gates of the webway sealed against the demonic hordes that pressed against them. Every moment of that effort cost him strength he could not spare, and Magnus was coming. Vulcan had felt his brother's approach through dreams, visions of a volcanic nightmare, a realm of black skies and boiling earth. In these dreams, Magnus still looked like Magnus, still spoke with something like reason. He offered salvation, enlightenment, and end to suffering. He promised that the pain Vulcan endured could be ended with a single word of acceptance. But Vulcan had seen through the illusion. He had seen the thing his brother had become. The truth, Vulcan had told him in their last dream encounter, is that my brother died long ago. You are not Magnus. You are an impossible god's idea of Magnus. Laughter had echoed all around them then, the laughter of 1,000 mocking voices, delighted at a joke only one of the brothers could ever understand. And Magnus had not heard it, could not hear it. He was blinded by the light of his own halo, wrapped so comfortably in his delusions that he could not see what he had become. Now the waiting was over. Magnus was close enough that Vulcan could feel him, could sense the sorcerous energies gathering for the final assault. Malkador the Sigillite stood at Vulcan's side, watching the webway portal with the hawkish concern that had become his constant expression. The Regent of Terra looked ancient, worn to the bone by the demands of the siege. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. "Is it time?" Malkador asked. "It is time," Vulcan replied. "One last time then. Let us see what he has to say." Vulcan closed his eyes and sank into the precious lie. In his dreams, his brother descended slowly in a haze of purifying light. The light warmed the dragon, for that was how Vulcan appeared in this realm, a creature of scales and fire and ancient power. It quickened his blood and reknit the throbbing internal breaches inside his body. It promised true healing if he would only stop resisting it. "I hate seeing you like this," Magnus said. Compassion shone in his one eye. "It needn't be this way, brother. You are not my brother." "Let me in," Magnus countered. "This is only the beginning of your pain, brother. I've foreseen far greater agony in your future, agony even you cannot endure. But that pain will end with the mercy I bring." The dragon dared not turn his back on his one-eyed brother, even here in dreams. He withdrew slowly, crawling over the rocks, his slitted gaze never leaving the sorcerer. "Let me in," Magnus said again. How much strength does father have left? How much time remains in his performative defiance? An hour? A day? The sky above the ash cloud seethes with the god's arrival. The Khan is finished. Gilliman is still lost in the endless black. Angron bathes the Palatine ring in imperial blood, and soon he will break Sanguinius. Fate sings of all of this, Vulcan. I will reach the webway portal. I will break Father's barrier. In a million futures I already have. Don't make me break you with it. The dragon gave a growl. I am not sure I can be broken. You can die, Vulcan. You can be unmade. Everything of mortal origin can be unwoven with the lullaby of obliteration. Please don't make me be the one to end you. Vulcan opened his eyes. The dream was over, but the truth of it lingered. Magnus was coming, and when he arrived, Vulcan would face him, not in dreams, but in the waking world, where there could be no illusions and no retreat. He raised his hammer, Erdrakule, and waited for his brother to arrive. Above the tortured earth, the battle for Terra had reached its final phase. The Palatine Ring was all that remained, that narrow band of fortifications surrounding the Sanctum Imperialis itself. Everything beyond it had fallen. The great bastions that had held for months were now ruins or enemy strongholds. The districts of the inner palace were carpeted with the dead, their bodies forming new terrain features in the endless wasteland of ash and rubble. The world had become something alien. The ground was infected now, covered with patches where the earth was plagued with calluses and warts, rippling pools of unwater that stank like cancer, marble-sweated pus, soil bled. Bodies that fell to the ground were slowly claimed by tendrils of unreal matter, fused to infected stone, amalgamated into masses of necrotic flesh. A garden was growing in the wasteland, filled with fruit that had no right to ripen. The traitor armies pressed in from all directions, a tide of corrupted flesh and demonic fury that seemed infinite in its numbers. Titans walked among them, god machines of the traitorous legios, their weapons tearing great wounds in the loyalist defenses. And above it all, circling like vultures waiting for a meal, flew the daemons, creatures of nightmare given form by the weakening of the Emperor's psychic shields. For the Emperor was weakening, everyone could feel it. The great ward shield that had protected the palace was failing, its barriers sinking into impotence as the master of mankind expended more and more of his power. The Neverborn could worm their way in now, darting out across the battlements, spinning down from the firelit air, thrusting up from the toxic soils. At the Eternity Gate, the last barrier before the sanctum itself, Sanguinius waited with the remnants of 3 legions. The great angel stood upon the Delphic battlement, his white wings folded against his back, his golden armor gleaming even through the layer of ash that coated everything. He had been fighting without rest for days now, soaring through the ruins in search of enemies, rallying broken units, leading counterattacks wherever the line threatened to break. The Khan was wounded unto death at Lion's Gate. Dawn was trapped at Bab Bastion, surrounded by the enemy. Only Sanguinius remained free to move, free to fight, free to inspire. Around him stood the Blood Angels, the Imperial Fists, the White Scars, all that remained of the defenders who had not been trapped in the outlying bastions or cut down in the fighting retreat. They numbered perhaps 30,000 Space Marines. Against them came millions. Zephon had reached the wall just hours ago, having made the perilous journey from Rezavi Bastion through the ash-choked wasteland. Arcan Land walked beside him, the techno-archaeologist Skitarius bodyguard Transactor 7-1 bringing up the rear. His thralls, Shafir, Ariste, and Shenkai, carried what supplies they could salvage. The reunion with his legion had been brief and bittersweet. So many faces were missing. So many brothers had fallen in the weeks since Gorgon Bar. But those who remained welcomed him with quiet nods and clasped forearms, and Zephon took his place among them as if he had never been gone. "My lord," said Amit, the flesh Terra, approaching Sanguinius with his scarred face showing nothing of the exhaustion he surely felt. "The enemy vanguard approaches," Sanguinius nodded. He had already seen them, had been watching them for hours through the swirling ash, a tide of darkness rolling toward the last light of humanity. At its head came something vast and terrible, a shape that defied mortal comprehension. "Sound the call," Sanguinius said quietly. "Let every warrior know that this is the hour. This is the moment for which we were made." The horns rang out across the Delphic battlement, their notes carrying even over the thunder of the approaching horde, and the defenders of the Eternity Gate raised their weapons and prepared to die. Before the battle began, Zephon found himself in conversation with Arcan Land. They stood on the wall together, looking out at the enemy host that gathered in the wasteland. The ash fell around them like grey snow, coating everything in a layer of death. Zephon's armor systems filtered the worst of it, but he could still taste the corruption in the air. "Tell me, Zephon," Land said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Are you scared? What should he say in such a moment? Should he be Astartes, resolute to the very end, the rock upon which the enemy wave would break? Or should he be human, confessing to emotions that warriors of the legions were trained not to feel?" The answer came to him, bare in its obviousness. He would be a blood angel. Anything else would be artifice. "Yes," he admitted. "I am afraid." Land stared at him, unblinking. "Afraid of dying?" "Yes and no," Zephon said. "I am not frightened by the thought of the blade or bolt that will end my life. I am not afraid of the pain to come, nor of the nothingness that comes after it. But there will be a physical element when the horde advances upon us. My heart will beat harder, my mouth will go dry, and I will want to run. There will be a flicker within me, that human instinct within the transhuman conditioning, to fall back and preserve my existence. I will feel it, but I will not give in to it. When they say of us that we know no fear, it is because that is the way it seems to those watching us. But we feel fear. We simply do not surrender to it. We do not let it affect our actions. In that respect, we are not fearless, merely brave." Land seemed to consider this. "I think, if you'd told me that all you feared was failure, or dying with your duty undone, I might have vomited." Zephon surprised himself by grinning. "Would that be too poetic? No, it would be too much like grok shit." Land brushed some of the settling ash from his bowled pate. "Besides, it's easy to be brave when you're practically immortal. I will die tomorrow regardless of Legiones Astartes genetics. In that regard, I am as mortal as you and all of these courageous souls standing with us on the wall." Land stared at him for a long moment, trying to see something within the Blood Angel's face. Then he shook his head. "Let me tell you exactly how wrong you are," Land said. "The difference between you and me, the difference between my kind and your kind, is that we live, and you exist. When we die, the galaxy loses all our dreams and hopes and ambitions. Children aren't born, discoveries aren't made. But you are a weapon. You were made for battle, and have neither a fate nor a future outside of war. When your kind dies, it's no different from the shattering of a sword. No dreams are lost, no fates are altered. Just a weapon breaking while doing what it was made to do." There was no mirth in Zephon's eyes now. Land had spoken a truth that he himself had considered many times, and perhaps the Martian was right. But Zephon reached out and placed his hand on Land's shoulder with gentle, absolute strength. "Shut up, Arkan. Just this once, please shut up." He waited until surprise had knocked Land speechless. "It may be that you are right, but I want your promise that tomorrow you will forgo your usual cowardice. You will stand with Shafir, Eristes, and Shenkai. I will not forgive cowardice tomorrow. If I learn that you've left them to face harm after agreeing to stand with them, I will find you and I will kill you." Land gaped at him. "I will beat you to death with my bare hands, Arkan. With the very hands you gave me. Do you hear me? Do you understand?" Land nodded. "Good. Now get some sleep if you are able. It will help." He walked away, leaving Land to flush red beneath the gazes of nearby soldiers. The last thing the Blood Angel heard from Land was a quiet affirmation to his Scaterius companion. He has changed. The battle began with a Titan. The Reaver-class god machine Daughter of Torment strode out of the ash cloud, its corrupted form festooned with the banners of Legio Mordaxis. It came not as a war engine, but as an emissary, and the gift it bore was one of calculated cruelty. In its great mechanical palm, cradled with misleading gentleness, lay a Blood Angel. Captain Idamas of the 99th Company had been captured days ago during the fighting retreat from the outer districts. Now he was displayed before his brothers, mutilated but still alive, 7 spears thrust through his body to pin him to the Titan's hand. His eyes had been burned out with some corrosive agent, his tongue had been torn from his mouth, but he was still breathing, still trying to speak, blood bubbling from his lips with every attempt. The Scaterius, who stood near Zephon, expressed a sliver of code that Land translated. She said it pained her to see any god machine on the wrong side of the war. Undoubtedly so, because she had once fought alongside Legio Mordaxis, and she mourned that she must now see their engines animated by heretical purpose. Horus, Warmaster and true Emperor of the Imperium, offers the defenders of the Sanctum Imperialis his warmest greetings, the Titan announced in a trio of overlapping feminine voices, all seeming to speak with throatfuls of venom. He commends you on your resolve thus far, and admires you all for your efforts in fighting for what you believe is right. The message continued, offering terms of surrender that no one present would accept. But the true purpose of the display was not diplomacy, it was demoralization. The enemy wanted the defenders to see what awaited them if they were taken alive. They wanted Sanguinius to watch his son suffer. Zephan's thrusters whined as he took a step forward, ready to launch himself toward the Titan. But Sanguinius's voice stopped him cold. "Hold, Zephan. Do you truly believe you can surge over there and save him? Stand down, bringer of sorrow." The name cut deep. Bringer of sorrow, his old title, from before his injury, from when he had led the high host of the Blood Angels. He had thought that warrior dead, but perhaps some part of him remained. "Transactor 7-1, the angel said softly. "Please take the shot." The Scutarius hesitated for only a moment, then raised her arquebus and fired. A kilometer away, Captain Adamus jerked, and the insides of his skull blasted out the back of his head. It was a mercy killing, the only mercy that could be offered. "Thank you," said Sanguinius. The Titan, its performative cruelty stolen, nevertheless finished crushing the corpse between its digits. There was a brief anticlimactic pop of sparking energy as Captain Adamus's power pack detonated. Then all that remained were the bloody, meat-wadded scraps of ceramite embedded into the god machine's fingers. "That was an ugly death," murmured Land, seemingly to himself. "But he lived a warrior's life," Sanguinius countered. And then the Titan turned and strode back toward the enemy lines. In its wake came the Horde. They came in their millions, world-eaters in gore-splattered ceramite, their chain axes howling for blood, Death Guard in their corroded armor, spreading plague and despair with every step, sons of Horus in sea-green plate, fighting with the cold precision that had once made them the finest legion of all, word-bearers chanting hymns to dark gods, emperors' children, night lords, iron warriors. Every traitor legion was represented in that tide, united now in their hatred of the emperor and everything he had built. Behind them came the mortal hosts, millions of soldiers in ragged uniforms, conscripts and fanatics and cultists, who threw themselves at the loyalist lines with mindless devotion. And among them walked the daemons, creatures that had no right to exist in the material universe, their very presence an affront to sanity. And at the head of it all, towering above them all, came Angron. The daemon Primarch was a nightmare made manifest, a creature of brass and blood, its form only vaguely humanoid, its face a mask of eternal rage. Wings of bloody membrane spread from its back. Horns crowned its skull. In its hands it carried a black sword that screamed with the voices of all the souls it had devoured. Once, Angron had been Sanguinius's brother. Once, they had fought side by side in the Great Crusade, bringing worlds into the Emperor's light. But the nails, those cursed implants that the slavers of New Syria had hammered into his skull, had always been killing him, always been twisting him toward rage and madness. When Horus had offered him release through the dark gods, Angron had accepted without hesitation. Lorgar had written of Angron too. In the same passage that spoke of Sanguinius, the one with the most to prove is the barbarian of New Syria, but Angron has never possessed any desire to live up to the Emperor's expectations. He regards such a fate as worse than failure. To him, it would be nothing less than a second slavery. Now he came to claim Sanguinius's life, and through him, the Emperor's. Sanguinius watched his brother approach, and felt nothing but sorrow. "My son," Sanguinius said, not to Angron but to Amit, "when I fall, you will take command." Amit's scarred face showed nothing. "You will not fall, my lord." "I will," Sanguinius replied, and there was no fear in his voice, only certainty. "I have seen it, but you will endure. You will hold this gate until the end, no matter what comes." Before Amit could respond, Sanguinius spread his wings and leapt into the sky. The angel and the daemon met in the air, beneath a sky the color of blood. The first impact of blade against blade was a metallic thundercrack that echoed across the battlefield. Below them, their sons waged war in the shadows of their father's wings, blood angels and world eaters tearing at each other in the eternal struggle between rage and sorrow. Angron swung, and the black blade shrieked, its steel fattened on souls. But Sanguinius was gone, twisting away, soaring higher. The daemon beat its wings and gave chase, enraged at its own cumbersome strength. It was like fighting a shadow. Each time Angron closed on Sanguinius, the angel rolled aside or furled his wings and dropped away. This was not a battle of equals. Angron was stronger now than he had ever been, blessed by Khorne with power that defied mortal comprehension. Every death on the battlefield below fed him strength. Every skull that fell added to his fury. He was a god of war made manifest, and against such power, even a Primarch should have been as nothing. But Sanguinius was the Emperor's angel, and he had been born for this moment. He dove low, swooping toward the ground, and Angron followed. Volkite beams stabbed up at them both, lancing the sky. They flew through detonations that blackened the angel's armor and darkened his wings, explosions that did nothing but tighten the daemon's hold on Incarnation. Closer, Angron came. He could smell the sweat on his brother's skin. He could hear the drumbeat of his brother's blood. He could smell the sweetness of the angel's wounds. And then Sanguinius struck. He veered away with a grace Angron could not match, and a slash of straight silver ripped across the daemon's face. There was no pain. Most of his face had been cut from his skull, but there was no pain. He experienced it the way others might feel grief or trauma, a helplessness, a wound within that could only be overcome with the running of enemy blood. His eyes regenerated as he thrashed blindly with his blade. He could see again, and his brother's soul flared brightest of all. The duel raged across the sky above the Eternity Gate. They crashed through the glaciaic dome of a Titan's shrine, obliterating sacred artwork beneath their tumbling bodies. They raced between spires and through clouds of ash, each seeking the killing blow that would end the other. Angron tore the angel from the sky and bore him down to earth. Sanguinius blasted one of the daemon's arms away with a melter pistol and leapt back into the air. Through it all, Horus watched. The War Master's voice echoed inside Angron's skull, transmitted through the nails that still tormented him even in his daemon form. "Kill him," Horus commanded. "This is your chance, what you were born and reborn for." But for the first time, Angron heard the weakness in his brother's voice. The babbling of a frightened creature, speaking as though it were in control. The Lord of the Red Sands paid it no heed. He was tiring. Sanguinius sensed it, saw it in the flicker of his brother's soulfire. The angel's strength was running dry. The war, the battles on the walls, the endless fighting had taken their toll. But Angron was tiring too, though for different reasons. The daemon's fury was infinite, but the vessel that contained it was not. Even gods could be worn down. They soared above a dying titan into black smoke and the white fire of plasma. The billowing smoke could not hide the light of the angel's soul. Angron was close enough that he parted his jaws to reveal rows of mismatched teeth jutting from bleeding gums. As they circled in this burning sphere, the daemon gave a draconic roar of triumph. Sanguinius climbed, soared, his wings carrying him higher than Angron could easily follow. And then he dove. The angel fell like a comet, his sword extended before him, his wings pressed tight against his body to maximize his speed. Angron raised his blade to meet him, and for an instant they were frozen in time, the daemon Primarch with his weapon lifted, the loyal son of the Emperor falling toward him with death in his eyes. The impact shattered both their guards. Sanguinius's blade punched through Angron's chest, driving deep into the space where his heart should have been. At the same moment, the daemon's talons raked across the angel's back, shredding armor and flesh, leaving wounds that would never fully heal. They fell together, locked in their killing embrace, crashing to earth before the Eternity Gate. Angron rose first. The daemon pulled itself up from the crater their impact had created, the sword still embedded in its chest. It reached up with one clawed hand and pulled the blade free, casting it aside. The wound began to close immediately, flesh knitting together, power flowing into the damaged form from the endless ocean of death that surrounded them. Sanguinius rose more slowly. His armor was cracked in a dozen places, leaking blood from wounds that even a Primarch's regeneration would struggle to heal. One of his wings hung at an odd angle, broken by the impact. But he reached down and retrieved his sword, and when he straightened, his eyes were as clear and bright as they had ever been. "Again," Angron growled, the word barely intelligible through his twisted throat. "Again," Sanguinius agreed. They came together in a blur of golden light and crimson shadow, their blades meeting in a storm of sparks and screaming metal. Angron was stronger, but Sanguinius was faster. Angron could not be killed, but Sanguinius would not be stopped. They fought as brothers, as enemies, as reflections of everything the Imperium had been and everything it had become. The defenders of the Eternity Gate watched in awe and horror as their Primarch battled for their survival. The World Eaters howled with rage as their father struggled against the Golden Angel, and above it all, In the blood-red sky, something vast and terrible began to take shape, a shadow that had no source, a presence that had no form. Khorne was watching. The blood god was pleased. The final exchange lasted only seconds. Sanguinius saw the opening, a moment when Angron's guard dropped, when his fury overwhelmed his skill, when everything aligned for one perfect strike. He took it. His blade drove upward, through the daemon's chin, through its skull, emerging from the top of its head in a fountain of burning ichor. Angron screamed, not in pain, for he was beyond pain now, but in something like surprise. His great claws reached for Sanguinius, seeking to drag the angel down with him, but Sanguinius was already gone, pulling his blade free and leaping back. The daemon fell. The body of Angron, Lord of the Red Sands, Daemon Prince of Khorne, crashed upon the stairs leading to the Eternity Gate. The earth quaked with the impact, and in its wake, a colossal cry rose from the throat of every living world eater, a lamentation that was not wholly physical, but something blasphemous felt in the creases of the mind. Demigods should not die. Sanguinius landed beside the corpse, his wings spread wide, his sword dripping with the essence of his fallen brother. He was wounded beyond any injury he had ever suffered, his body broken, his spirit exhausted, his blood pooling on the marble steps. But he was alive, and Angron was not. "Forward!" cried the word-bearers and sons of Horus, seeing their champion fallen. Forward for the Pantheon, death to the false emperor. But the world-eaters did not advance. Instead, they turned on their allies. The madness spread like wildfire through the traitor ranks. With Angron's death, the last restraints on his legion shattered, the nails bit deep, demanding blood, and the world-eaters, already poised on the edge of insanity, tumbled over into the abyss. They fell upon each other, upon their allies, upon anyone within reach of their weapons. Kill, maim, burn. The words became a chant, a prayer, a hymn to the god who had claimed them. Inzar of the word-bearers tried to rally them. "Forward," he cried, his crozius raised. "The gate is open. We can still win." A world-eater turned to face him, his eyes blazing with madness. "Kill," he grunted. "Come with me. We can still maim." The world-eater's axe took Inzar's arm at the elbow. His next swing opened the chaplain from throat to groin. As Inzar fell, he heard the gods laughing, and for the first time, there was no comfort in the sound. They were laughing at him. They had always been laughing at him. All across the battlefield, the same scene repeated. World-eaters butchered Death Guard. They cut down sons of Horus. They slaughtered word-bearers and emperors' children without discrimination. The tide that had been poised to overwhelm the Eternity Gate dissolved into a sea of fratricidal madness, and the defenders, unbelieving, watched as their salvation unfolded before them. The Eternity Gate closed. Sanguinius watched from the steps as the great doors swung shut, sealing the Sanctum Imperialis against the chaos outside. The last of the defenders had withdrawn, carrying their wounded, leaving only the dead behind. The battle was over, not won precisely, but survived. For now. He knew this was only a reprieve. The world-eaters would eventually spend their fury, would run out of allies to kill. The other traitor legions would regroup, would press forward again, and Horus himself was coming, the War Master, the vessel of the Pantheon, the greatest threat of all. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, the gate held. Amit found him on the steps, surrounded by the bodies of the slain. The flesh-tearer's armor was cracked and bloody, testament to the fighting he had endured while his Primarch jeweled in the sky. "My lord," Amit said, "you should come inside. Your wounds need tending." Sanguinius shook his head. "Not yet. I need to see this." He gestured at the carnage before them, the world-eaters still rampaging through their own lines, the traitor army in disarray, the impossible victory that had been handed to them by their enemy's own madness. "This is what chaos truly is," Sanguinius said softly. "Not strength, but weakness. Not unity, but discord. They can never win, Amit. Not truly. Because they cannot stop fighting, even when the fight is over." Amit said nothing. He had no words for this moment, no response to his Primarch's quiet certainty. "The war is not over," Sanguinius continued. "Horus still comes. And when he arrives, I will face him, as I have always known I must." He turned to look at Amit, and in his eyes there was something ancient and sad. "But you will live, my son. You and your brothers. You will carry the 9th Legion forward into whatever future awaits. My lord." No arguments, this is not a request. Sanguinius reached out and placed his hand on Amit's shoulder, and the flesh Terra felt the weight of 10,000 years in that touch. You are my sons, my legacy. Whatever happens to me, you must endure. Sleep now, if you can. Let the thunder of gods at war fade to silence. Let the screams of the dying become the whisper of memory, and the clash of divine blades the echo of a story half remembered. Dream of an angel who stood against a daemon and won. Of a gate that held against the tide. Of a moment of impossible hope in the darkness of the siege. In the wasteland beyond the eternity gate, a lone blood angel wandered through the ash. Nasir Amit, the flesh Terra, had been separated from his brothers during the chaos of the battle. The Vox was dead. The dust was too thick to see through. He had been walking for hours, following what he hoped was the direction of the sanctum, finding only bodies and silence. A daemon was born in the moment a queen died, poisoned by the king she loved. As she sighed out her last breath, tangled in blood-patterned silk sheets, the daemon gave its birth cry in the realm behind reality. History, that ravening liar willed come to swallow the names of the treacherous king and the queen he betrayed. But the daemon remembered. It always remembered. Now it manifested before Amit, clawing its way into reality from a pile of corpses. Its hands were 9-jointed talons fused to the hilt of a corroded sword. Its lone eye was bulbous, milky, crusted half-closed. In the cancerous plasma that passed for its flesh, it bore the plague that once swept through an ancient kingdom. It died 4 seconds after manifesting. Amit's knife and chainsword reduced it to dissolving pieces of ectoplasmic slush that burned away to nothing in the filthy air. He cleaned his blades and moved on, his vox crackling with the call he had made 19 times since Pythia Bastion fell. This is Dominion Nasir Amit of the 9th Legion. Is anyone out there? Static. Is anyone out there? Static. He kept walking. Somewhere ahead, he knew, the war continued. Somewhere ahead, his brothers fought and died. And somewhere in the blood-red sky, his Primarch faced a daemon that had once been his brother. He would find them, or he would die trying. That was the way of the Blood Angels. That was the way of all who served the Emperor in these final days. The war is not over. Horus descends from the vengeful spirit, his power greater than ever, his purpose clear. The Emperor waits upon his golden throne, holding back the horrors of the warp with the last of his strength. And Sanguinius, wounded unto death but still standing, prepares for the battle that has haunted his dreams since before the Heresy began. In the webway, Vulcan faces Magnus. The Crimson King has come at last, his daemon form terrible beyond imagining, his sorceries potent enough to crack reality itself. The battle for the webway portal, for the Emperor's life, rages in dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. At the Eternity Gate, the defenders hold. Zephon stands with his brothers, his bionic hands gripping weapons that feel as natural as flesh ever did. Arcan Land keeps his promise, standing with the Blood Angel's thralls, his Scaterius companion ready to fight and die for a cause she barely understands. And the gate itself, that massive portal of gold and adamantium, remains sealed against the horrors that press against it. The siege of Terra continues. The end draws near. And in the shadows between worlds, the gods watch and wait and laugh. For this is the nature of chaos, not strength but weakness, not unity but discord. The traitors turn on each other even as they press toward victory. The World Eaters butcher their allies in their madness. The Death Guard spread plague without discrimination. The sons of Horus fight for a war master who is himself no longer truly Horus, but merely a vessel for powers he cannot control. They can never win, not truly, because they cannot stop fighting even when the fight is over. But that knowledge is cold comfort to the defenders of the Eternity Gate. They do not fight for victory, that hope was abandoned long ago. They fight for time. For every moment they buy, the Emperor grows stronger. For every enemy they kill, the tide is held back. For every drop of blood they shed, humanity's future is preserved. This is the story of Echoes of Eternity, the story of the last battle before the last battle, the story of angels and daemons, of a gate that could not fall and a wall that had to hold, the story of the moments before the end of everything. Until next time.